Hey everybody, I'm Michael David back with you, and today we're talking about the Beach Boys' lost album, which was called Smile in the 60s. I'm reading this great book, Mike Love, Good Vibrations, and really enjoying his take on what happened. There we go. uh, in the early 60s, the Beach Boys had great success with surfing songs, hot rod songs, party songs, California beach fun. And they all wore these matching white outfits with candy striped and shirts and did great. And then around 67, I mean, the Beatles were really emerging as the most popular group in the world or had been. And the Beach Boys, I think, kind of cracked under that pressure. It was just too much for Brian Wilson. He was going to do this masterpiece album called Smile in 1967, but he just couldn't pull it together. It was so complicated, and he was taking drugs, LSD. That had a lot to do with it. It was on the one hand making him and the Beach Boys more creative, but on the other hand, they were having all kinds of hallucinations and problems. At one point, he wrote this horrifying song called Fire, and he thought that there were a lot of fires around Los Angeles at the time, and he thought it was connected to his song. It was crazy stuff. He had a mansion in Bel Air, and he brought in this sandbox, and they were all wearing fire hats, and there was a piano in the sandbox. It was wild. And eventually, it came out as an album called Smiley Smile, which had some of that greatness in there, but a lot of it was just never made it to the actual album. And there was a good song called Heroes and Villains, which made it up to number 12 on the charts. And it's what that album could have been. It was one piece of it. So at least they got that great single out of it. But at that point, the Beatles were doing whole albums like Sgt. Pepper, and they wanted a whole big album to compete with that. So, I mean, if you really want to know all the issues with the 60s and the drugs and the war and the music changing, I mean, this book, Mike Love, Good Vibrations, is well worth the read because they were in the center of it all. And by the late 60s, the Beach Boys were out of fashion, out of time. Even their outfits did not fit. They probably should have had better marketing and gone much more further in with the hippie movement, but they just didn't for whatever reason. Um, so they had albums like Sunflower and Wild Honey, which was kind of an R&B album. They were just trying different things, almost like a ship in the ocean, just floating around in different places. And they were able to pull off some really great songs, but it was hard for them once again to put together a cohesive album at that time. So you can look at they had an album called Holland. They went to Holland. It was very expensive for them, and a lot of their tours lost money, and going to Holland to make this album was very expensive for them. But they did lose their record contract with Capitol Records by 1969. The surf songs that Capitol wanted to market, they were no longer writing, and it was out of fashion with the times at that moment, and they weren't selling. Their albums were bombing, except for, like I said, select singles at times. So when I was a kid, all of a sudden in elementary school, this album came out called Endless Summer by the Beach Boys. I was really young. I had no idea who they were. I didn't know it was a greatest hits collection. None of us did. I thought it was a new album by a new group. Endless Summer, the Beach Boys. They were so smart not to call it Beach Boys Greatest Hits. They gave it a name, Endless Summer. And my friends, we were all listening to it. This double album. Now, this was cool marketing and a great album cover, and this was in step with the time. So they got it together with this album, Endless Summer. It went to number one. And all the elementary school kids in my era, my 70s generation, bought it. It was fresh and new. We loved it. We couldn't believe how many of these songs were great. And there was nothing in the packaging that said it was the greatest hits from the past generation, nor did we care. We just, I lived in California at the time. I was skateboarding and boogie boarding in the ocean, and this worked for me. There's always going to be a new generation of kids going off to surf and skateboard and get into cars, and this music has become timeless. So that was in 1974, and the Beach Boys were massive. They had another wave of popularity, if you will. And Mike Love says in the book he got really burned on the songwriting credits. He co-wrote a lot of these songs, but it never made it to the publishing. And the catalog of songs was sold to a different company, and they were in a big fight with their uncle, and he could have sold it to them, but he didn't. It was just huge family feuds, and he lost access and control of his publishing and his co-writing credits. So what he did say is, what we became road warriors. We could go all over the world and travel and have great concerts and make money and make a good living that way. So that's what they did. The other part I want to mention, it's a really big deal in the Beach Boys story, is they went to India in the 60s. They were studying Eastern thought and meditation, as were the Beatles. And so they all went to this spiritual retreat in India in 1968, along with Donovan and Mia Farrow. It was kind of a cultural event. And they learned transcendental meditation, which was apparently a accessible form of meditation that would give you peacefulness and clarity. And for them, in the insane drugs lifestyle they were in, for them it worked for them and created a more calmer lifestyle for them at that moment, and probably got Brian somewhat off of LSD at that time, and was able to help them. And Mike Love definitely stuck with transcendental meditation for years. He became a teacher, and he wore white robes sometimes on stage, and that's just his journey. That's part of his persona, and it's a really big part of the Beach Boys story. The downside is the drummer got involved with the hippies, and some of the hippies were Charles Manson and his women. They came to live in his house. It was crazy that Dennis allowed all these people to live in his house that was leased, and he ended up just finished leaving, just moving away from his own house and ending the lease. And the landlord kicked out Manson and the women, and then they went to Spawn Ranch. And Manson wanted to record with the Beach Boys. They ended up recording one of his songs. But eventually, the Beach Boys put distance between themselves and Charles Manson. And he was really angry about that. And so it could have been them. They could have been the victims of murder. Manson was definitely in a rage and acting out because he wasn't going to become a pop star. He wasn't going to be part of the Beach Boys circle. And that's simplifying it a lot. There was a lot more going on. But that was one part of the story. So that hurt the Beach Boys' career as well. They were no longer just associated with a fun day at the beach. They were, for years, associated with Manson's family, and they were drawn into the headlines and the newspapers. So that's another reason why their wave crashed for several years. It's a complex story. They're one of America's favorite bands, but they've had these massive up and down waves that have affected the Beach Boys. And I'll close with this. I do remember in the late 70s, they came out with this great song. It's called Good Timing. It's a short song. It's really beautiful harmonies and melodies. I mean, no one does that like the Beach Boys, except maybe the Everly Brothers or the Bee Gees. I mean, nobody has these harmonies. And it's called Good Timing. You can look up this song. It's great. I hope you enjoy it. It's a really beautiful piece of music. And I'll close with that. I just hope you dig into the Beach Boys' deep catalog and find out what you like and what you love. Like I said, these are just my opinions, and I want to just turn you on to all of the deep catalog of their music, and you'll find all kinds of treasure. I'm Michael David. Like, subscribe, Patreon. I'm over at downpeppertreelane.com, and I have some great stuff, some vintage cool things, jewelry up on eBay. Just go to my site at downpeppertreelane.com. Thank you.